Without further ado, I would like to welcome Dusty and Andy on stage and give them a warm applause and some big yells. Take it away.
All right. Thank you. It's wonderful to be here and to see so many familiar faces joining the conversation. I think this is a really important topic, and I'm excited to explore it with you today. My name is Andrew Midgley, and I work in the product marketing team at Apptio. Cloudability has been my life for the last 9 years, and before that, I worked in a proto FinOps role at realestate.com.au back in Australia. I've certainly enjoyed having a front row seat, getting to watch the FinOps movement grow into what it is today. Now, originally, I was set to be joined today by Sam Keller from Highland. Unfortunately, due to family situation, he wasn't able to make it, so we've had to really...
Sorry, you're stuck with me.
So we've had to really shake things up at the last moment. But to be honest, I couldn't have had a better stand-in than today, and I have Dusty with me today.
Glad to be here. And thanks everybody. I know there's a lot of good sessions going on at this time slot, so thanks for coming to this one, and I'm excited to share some of my experiences and practices with you guys. So,
just
do what here? Oh, in between the white lines. So we're okay. Sorry. Now you have to be close to me.
Anyway,
more intimate.
So today I've got Dusty.
Cool.
Okay, so my goal today is that you walk away from this session with a holistic view of where different resource optimization activities fit in, and an understanding of the fundamental challenges at play. I also hope you can go back to the office next week with an extra 2 or 3 items in your toolkit that can bring immediate savings to your organizations. So what will we cover today? To kick things off, I'll get Dusty to briefly share his FinOps journey and why he's so passionate about our space. Then we'll discuss the FinOps framework, a resource provided by the Foundation to help connect all key FinOps concerns. And in doing so, I'll highlight the role and significance of resource optimization. We'll then review challenges and best practices across the 5 key optimization areas, and finish up with how this can be backed by unit costs and unit economics. So that's what we're going to cover today.
Cool. So my journey started, it's back in 2016. So I got to share this story with you. I love sharing stories. I think they're more engaging and interacting. So I was sitting in the office. I was at downtown Columbus, Ohio, at Nationwide headquarters. And it was after 5 o'clock on a Friday. So all my friends or friend was at happy hour, and for some reason I'm the last one in the office. And I'm sitting in there in my little cubicle, and I hear the footsteps. And like, Friday at 5 o'clock, you're hearing footsteps. It's nothing good. And the vice president of infrastructure and operations, Mimi Chisver, walks by, and she stops in my cube, and she says, "Hey, Dusty, I got a problem. I need your help." "Sure, what can I do?" She said, "I just received this invoice from accounts payable, and I have no idea what it is." It was like a $50,000 bill from Amazon. And I'm like, well, great. Somebody probably got their corporate Amex out and bought some books on Amazon.com. Like, I don't know what do you expect me to do with this, right? So what we learned from that is people were actually using the @nationwide.com email domain and then putting their address. The billable address was One Nationwide Plaza. So all the bills were coming in, right? So I had to go figure all this stuff out. And I didn't know at the time, but that was my journey, what started me in FinOps. We went, did a strategic hire. So those of you probably know the director of community for the foundation, Joe Daly. We went out and hired him because we knew he would come in and tell us what not to do versus what to do. So we learned from all his mistakes. Brought him into Nationwide. We built up a practice for the better part of 4 years. At that time, we had the practice in a pretty good operational state. And then I transitioned over to the consulting space to kind of share with some other customers what I had learned at Nationwide. So I worked at Apptio for 2 years, and I knew Midge from CloudEcon in 2019. I think it's the first time we met. And did consulting there for a couple years. And then it dawned on me, I'm like, why don't I just go to a smaller company, take all my experience and learn a company I can invest in and grow with. So I'm at SailPoint. I've been there now a year and a half. We're early in our journey. So I'll share with a little bit what I can from SailPoint, a little bit what I've learned from Nationwide, my other experiences. So it's just kind of a whirlwind. That's the space we're at in FinOps. So
yeah,
that's me.
Awesome, Dusty. Yeah, so I love origin stories. For example, like Batman Begins or
Yeah.
whatever. But my FinOps origin story actually comes from two kind of disasters that at the time they were very stressful, but now I kind of think they're hilarious. But they go back to about 2012 when I was working at realestate.com.au. And the first disaster was how we actually did cost control. So we didn't know how to do it, so we said, well, there's a maximum amount of, we used Amazon native limits. So we said, there's a total of 50 instances that can be running at any one time. That's how we're going to control costs. But it turned out we made our engineers very, very angry when they couldn't start up their instances. So we increased it to 100 instances. They were happy for maybe a week. Yeah. And then, again, they got very, very angry. So we went through this cycle a while. It was almost fisticuffs, a bit of fighting at times. It was very, very stressful. So we need to do something more robust. That was our first experience. The second experience I had that was a mini disaster, maybe more like a major disaster at the time, was we had what we called the Zombie Apocalypse 1 and then the Zombie Apocalypse 2. And so we had a script that would go around and clean up all of our orphaned instances. And on 2 occasions, it kind of went bananas and literally deleted our entire dev and test environment. It's like hundreds of instances just gone. On 2 occasions that happened. So I was like, this stuff's real. I'm going to take it seriously. Yeah. And I joined Cloudability. So that's my origin story. So a great place to start this conversation is the FinOps framework. And I'm sure many of you have been studying it. It was updated back in March. So I'm going to guess it's on the front of your minds. But for me, so where does resource optimization fit into the FinOps framework? So for me, the most notable aspect is where this fits into the principles. The principle being, take advantage of the variable cost model of cloud. In fact, this really goes to the heart of why many organizations even use cloud in the first place. We could reframe this as, if you use something big, you pay big. If you use something small, you pay small. If you don't use anything at all, you just don't pay anything. So how about domains and capabilities? Well, we can see there's a dedicated capability called workload optimization that's backed by a whole bunch of best practices. In terms of the core personas, so I've got 2 highlighted there. So we could say that engineering is the main one, since they're the ones doing the actioning. But of course, our FinOps practitioners have a major role to play, both in facilitating this activity, but also in target setting. So I just want to ask you, Dusty, what's your experience with the personas across those 2 personas and any other personas that are relevant?
Yeah, I mean, it's really just a blend between engineering and finance, right? I mean, that's, in my experience, a lot of the perception, especially coming into a new organization, has really been around getting people over the notion that FinOps is really a finance function and not so much an engineering function. And I think we see that in the, with the engineering capability that's getting built out with the, we've got the new exam, right? The whole certification, everybody's got a link to that, right? So, for me, that's kind of coming into a new organization, really getting that, that bridge built between the 2 personas. So it's critical, especially when your spend's high, so.
Yeah. And it's quite amazing in a way. I mean, if we would go back 10 years and think about FinOps, or there was no FinOps, but to think about finance people and engineering people coming together, it was almost unimaginable, right?
And it's funny because at Nationwide, back to that story, it was one of the first things. We hired Joe, and then I don't know, David Lambert's on the TAC. I don't know if he's in this room today, but he's actually at Adobe now, and we hired someone from finance. And if you want to reduce waste, this is what you do. You hire someone from finance, and then you give them IAM permissions into the console and turn them loose. Cool. The next thing you know, terminate, stop. Yeah, so we got a lot of pushback, but it was fun while it lasted.
It sounds like a mini disaster.
It was a mini disaster, but it was on it. I was like, all right, great.
Awesome. Yeah, so one last note from the framework is about maturity, which you can see on the bottom right corner. So the crawl, walk, run approach is something we highly encourage because it provides practical stepping stones. And you'll see this later in the presentation today.
Awesome. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the state of FinOps surveys. And what you see on your slide there is there's the last 3 years, what is the biggest challenge? And there's been a shift this year to where waste and usage optimization has become the #1 challenge for FinOps practitioners. And being in the space now for close to 6 years, I ask myself why. Why is this a big challenge? And I want to share, personally for me today, I've got a lot of waste in my organization at SailPoint, and we're just getting started. We've got the visibility there, but actioning that waste is really a challenge. And if anybody's heard Merritt Hughes from Deloitte, you know, she gave me the sticker last night. She has an Altoids box and she passes it around. It says, if security is 0, FinOps is 0.5, right? For us, it's actually one step further. Quick story, I was in my garage, because that's what you do in the Midwest. I was 6 beers deep, and I just had this profound moment. And I always like the triple constraints theory of good, fast, and cheap, and everybody has the triangle. And I said, how does this apply to FinOps? How does this apply to my current position at SailPoint, where it's hard for me to action some of this waste? At the top of that triangle, I put the word sufficient. So as practitioners, as we look at waste and we look at usage optimization, our duty, one of our primary duties, is to make sure that the capacity we provision in the public cloud is sufficient enough to meet our workload demands, okay? So what that means is application stability. The bottom left part of that triangle is resilient. That's a security focus, right? So our applications are sufficient, our workloads are sufficient, they're available. Now they're resilient, right? We got hardened images. We've got intrusion detection, intrusion prevention. So I'm like, all right, great. So those are 2 legs of the triangle. Third one being efficient.
Yeah.
Okay, that's when the cost stuff comes into play. And that's the area that we really play in. And I say that because at my company right now, we had a change that went in literally within the past couple weeks, and it was attempting to put labels in Kubernetes, and there was a Terraform script that actually failed and took down one of our production clusters. So we had a customer-facing incident in the name of spend visibility and cost allocation. So now the sensitivity at my organization to go out and reduce waste, I have to balance the risk. There's a lot more scrutiny on the changes that go in now as a result of that, which is a good learning, right? But those are some of the challenges, I think, that actually surface that up to say, you know, I don't know how it is at your organization, but if you're an identity security company, system availability is a really big deal. So that's my triangle. Sufficient, resilient, efficient.
That's right. And I think the story I've got from you today and previously is that, you know, that resource optimization is consistently close to the top of your challenges, which is what we see from you guys, you know, when you're responding to the state of FinOps reports, which you can see here. For the last, you know, 2022, 23, 24, it has been either the top challenge or the top priority every year.
Every year.
So for me, hearing that from you is just sort of consistent with the rest of the market.
Yep.
Cool. So thanks, Dusty. So one way we've found to approach complex technology environments is to break them into the 3 major hybrid cloud categories of private cloud, managed Kubernetes, and regular public cloud, as you can see up here. This gives us a starting point to consider who is responsible for what, and it helps clarify where the major optimization opportunities will be. So one thing we can be thankful for is the public cloud providers have removed the burden of managing hardware. But of course, this does not apply to private cloud. That's still your problem there. For workload placement, this is something you're responsible for private cloud and Kubernetes, because both of these are based on multi-tenant clusters. Having well-placed workloads is crucial for efficiency, and this usually sits in the wheelhouse of your platform teams. Workload sizing and workload scheduling, on the other hand, this tends to sit more with your application engineers, and these are concerns that apply to all categories of hybrid cloud. So as we go through best practices for these different areas, amongst other things, we'll cover what efficiency metrics to use, we'll differentiate between disruptive and non-disruptive actions, and we'll look at how to engage with different stakeholders. So yeah, just a bit of a starting point, a framework for the conversation today. So I'm going to start with optimizing private cloud. I was actually a little bit nervous about whether to include this topic at all. But based on JR calling it out in yesterday's keynote, I'm actually feeling a lot better about presenting it today. In any case, there are some really important learnings that we can take from this problem space, and it is a crucial optimization area for many organizations. But before I dive in, could I please get you to raise your hand if your company is still running private cloud in any manner? That's still quite a lot.
Nice, yeah.
I asked the same question at reInvent, and I got like 2 hands. So
I'll reInvent, yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. Can you actually put your hand back up if your FinOps team has some role in overseeing that infrastructure? Well, I'm actually quite impressed how many people there are. So I feel really good about talking about it today.
Yeah. Awesome.
Okay, so the most common way we see people think of private cloud is as a fixed sunk cost, where the main way to save is to defer future hardware purchases by better utilizing current resources. Another consideration is preventing resource congestion, reducing this costly cause of performance degradation, and giving administrators time back instead of always troubleshooting. So the first lever available to you is to size your VMs intelligently. That is, to allocate the right amount of CPU and memory. This is similar to how you might right-size VMs in public cloud, but it's actually a little bit more straightforward, because you're not having to deal with this endless list of SKUs, like this endless list of instance types. You don't have to worry about that. The other good thing about VMs is that when you size up in private cloud, it's a non-disruptive action, generally. The second lever is the intelligent placement of these VMs across the underlying servers. So some people, you hear them talk about this as kind of bin packing. The situation you don't want to end up in is where you have a bunch of servers that are over-crammed with VMs, and then you have a bunch of servers that are kind of doing nothing or just have a few workloads running on them. That's what you want to avoid. So increasingly, we are seeing organizations leverage specialist software to continuously manipulate sizing and workload placement across their servers fleets. And the reason we're seeing that is that at scale, this problem becomes really difficult for human beings. So I'm actually going to just pause for a second and ask you, Dusty, completely different topic. When you think of San Diego, what do you think of?
San Diego has the world's #1 zoo, if anybody's been there. If not, I'd highly recommend that. So yeah, I like the zoo, man. Columbus has #2 right behind San Diego. So just...
There you go.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say something else, like Anchorman or something. Anyway, so you said the answer I've wanted you to say. So given the zoo seems to be the most popular attraction here, I thought I would attach a zoo animal from the zoo here to each of these optimization areas. So in this case, I'm actually going to go for the hippopotamus. The hippo, often ignored or detoured around, surprisingly dangerous. You might not know that, but well worth the effort if you can. So that's kind of the end of the private cloud conversation. Just any other thoughts that you had?
Yeah, well, so when I think about private cloud, I know for me and my experience, before I got into public cloud in the on-prem space, we managed a large VMware ESX environment, and one of the things that I had to be aware of was what the billing model was for the software that we place in the ESX. And sometimes it would be licensed by cores or what have you, and we were running SQL Server. And so when the billing construct changed, we had to make conscious decisions on, okay, how do we move these SQL Server VMs onto a single ESX host to really maximize the core count. So I would say just kind of be aware of what your licensing model looks like is one of the things to just achieve better density and, I'll say optimize your private cloud. So that was my experience.
Awesome. All right, so I'm going to change strides now, heading over more or less to public cloud, but specifically Kubernetes, which is quite a special space. So the first thing I'll say is that across our customer base, we have seen a rapid adoption of Kubernetes in recent times. And I think that's mostly been driven by the managed services that we see from the cloud providers, so things like EKS, GKE, and AKS. We can think of each of these Kubernetes clusters as a cloud inside a bigger cloud. Each one a multi-tenant environment, which has cloud concerns across areas like networking and security. So as FinOps practitioners, it can be difficult to get detailed visibility into how well optimized the different components are in this world. But where I'd recommend you start is looking at the unused versus used resources at the cluster level and track that over time. So that's information you should be able to get your hands on, hopefully. If you see on the screenshot here, it's not unusual for organizations to be running their servers, their clusters, at well below 50% utilization. It happens. If you don't have dedicated strategies, that's what can happen. But it is a big problem. So in terms of zoo animals, in this case, I'm actually going to go for the platypus. Everyone is super interested in the platypus, but it has a mixture of characteristics which is difficult to comprehend. In fact, it does freak some people out. So a little bit about the platypus. So it's an Australian mammal. It lays eggs. It has a duck bill, and it has a poisonous spur at the back of its legs.
Do we know if they're at the San Diego Zoo?
They are.
Is there actually is one?
I double-checked.
All right,
Sure.
cool. I've never seen one. So I'll take your word for it.
I've seen 2 in the wild. Anyway, so I was going to ask you, Dusty, what are you more familiar with? Platypuses or Kubernetes?
Oh, definitely Kubernetes. Yeah, I didn't know platypus was a dangerous beast, but it sounds like, stay away.
Kubernetes, awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so for Kubernetes, I am going to dive a little bit into the weeds, hopefully to unpack a little bit of that mystery and make it seem less like a platypus. So as a FinOps practitioner, the place you are going to start is sizing your containers. The reason being that if you aren't optimized here, you are basically stuck. If you have a lot of containers with high resource guarantees, the CPU and memory is going to need to be allocated, and you will not be able to consolidate your VMs even if they are underutilized. So some things to remember. Neither the request or limit is compulsory for any container. So generally, we are relying on our application engineers to set those values. Also, the containers within a pod get added up. So for example, if there are 2 containers in a pod, and each of these containers have a request for 100 megabytes of memory, then the pod will have a total request of 200 megabytes. And of course, all of these settings play into what's called the quality of service tiers and how the pods get allocated out to the VMs. And I will say, probably some people are hating the fact I use the word VM. Generally speaking, people would use the word node instead, but anyway. I kind of go between the two.
We'll be all right.
We'll be all right.
I got it.
Okay, so from a sizing perspective, so I'm going to talk about sizing, and then I'm going to talk about placement in the Kubernetes world. So from a sizing perspective, the biggest return you are going to get is by addressing containers that have resource guarantees beyond what they ever use. That is, the request setting for CPU or memory, and thus what is allocated to the workload, is above the needs of the workload. Of course, there are popular FinOps tools out there that can reach inside the Kubernetes world and identify these problematic containers. As you can see on the screen, there's a little screenshot. You should be able to list these containers out and then address the request setting as needed. So that's sizing for containers. In terms of pod placement, the situation you don't want to end up in is something similar to you see here, where you have some nodes or VMs that are sort of overwhelmed with workloads, and then you have other VMs that are much less underworked. What we generally see is a misplaced belief that the Kubernetes scheduler will prevent this problem through intelligent placement of pods. The issue is that this scheduling is a point-in-time activity. Afterwards, conditions change, demand on workloads go up and down, and a non-ideal state will emerge. No pressure evictions are a mechanism that Kubernetes does have to alleviate this problem, but this is reactive, and it doesn't take a holistic view to balance load usage. So that's the context for the pod placement and the issue that it has. So how do we solve this? So what are some ways we see our customers get great efficiency via well-placed pods? The first one is to take a continuous, proactive approach to pod placement, moving pods around as needed to ensure no nodes are constrained while others are underused. Done in this proactive way, we can also help avoid undesired downtime. Then behind the scenes, VMs are added or removed as total demand fluctuates. So there are FinOps tools out there that can manage the entire process. While customers may start in a manual approval mode, typically we see them transition to full automation as it is a problem, generally speaking, beyond human scale. So in terms of Kubernetes, just a general conversation, Dusty, what's your experience? What strategies have you found?
I think you hit on the high one. Like we talk about pushing usage optimization to the left in the community. So big thing is understand at the container level what's over provisioned and what's not. And you can see all the data is there, I mean down like to the millicore, right? But getting that information in front of the application teams that manage that deployment, then they can go in their YAML file, update those, resubmit them. I mean, that's what I've seen first. And then The other side of the equation is the people the platform team that actually manage the cluster. So at SailPoint, we have horizontal pod auto scaling, but really tuning the cluster parameters, the config, so that there is a descaler. Right? We don't want to always scale up and just get stuck, and then we're going to be at the cluster level, obviously paying more. So make sure you're aware of those configurations, both not only push the deployment stuff left to the application areas and the engineers, but then the platform team also make sure that they're doing their due diligence and scaling, both horizontal, vertical, or descaling.
Awesome. All right, so going to change strides and talk about right-sizing instances and volumes. So right-sizing instances and volumes, this is the first thing many people think of when it comes to optimizing private cloud. A very typical situation might be where you have an EC2 instance, it's provisioned with a very large type that's very expensive, and yet its utilization never goes above 10%. That's probably quite a familiar story to people. So by adjusting such an instance to a much smaller instance type, we can save a lot of money with really minimal risk, with no performance hit at all. So why don't we just do this all the time? Well, at scale, it's pretty tough. We have to get the right insights out to the right people. That's challenging.
Yeah.
And then the second thing is, it's not always obvious what the right instance type is. In terms of metrics, the best thing to track is overspend, which will never be zero. But if we can take overspend from $100,000 a month down to $50,000 a month, we can track the impact that we're having over time. So in terms of zoo animals, in this case, I'm actually going to go with...
Drum roll. Drum roll.
There we go, a lion. Ooh. So the lion, everyone is familiar with it. When you go to the zoo, you don't miss the lion. So that's what I think, that's what I'm talking about here. And this, I have up on the screen here the sort of crawl, walk, run approach. This is sort of what I've seen across our customer base. But just love to get your perspective, Dusty. I know you're very experienced. So what's worked for you? How do you get that scale and so forth?
The biggest thing for right-sizing is, there is typically, there's labor involved. There's investigation that needs to be done. A lot of times things will be oversized for a particular reason because we're getting ready to add workload in the future. So be aware of those things is what I would suggest. I know I am. And just ask questions, right? Because when you do right-sizing activities, it's like changing the engine in your car. You don't do it very often, and you're probably not going to do it maybe more than twice for the life of the instance. So I always start in dev. I've always started with the biggest savings opportunity in a lower tier environment where there's less risk, and then build that internal muscle. So say, okay, here's our process. Here's our ticketing process. Follow it through, track the savings, and then make sure you quantify those things. Make sure you get the engineers. People are out to the Equifax talk, right? And so they were really incentivize that behavior and build that internal muscle. And then once you get the confidence and the motion together, you step it up into production.
And I guess I think one thing that JR mentioned yesterday is like you're never permanently in a state of walk or even run. You're never permanently there. So it's something you're sort of having to always keep on. And I will say from our perspective, the goal at the end of the day, if you can get to a run state, is to get to some form of automation. So it might be actually automating actions. That's a possibility. Many of our customers don't want to do that. But at the very least, we should be automating our workflows, automatically getting insights out to our engineers and to our FinOps practitioners. That should be the goal at the end of the day. Awesome. So coming up to our fourth area, which is idle and orphaned resources. There are some major similarities between addressing idle resources and addressing right-sizing, as we spoke about a moment ago. So, but in terms of the challenge itself, the biggest difference is having a means to identify that a resource truly is not being used and therefore can be decommissioned, can be terminated, or at the very least turned off. So depending on the resource type, there may be status information or there might be activity metrics that can prove categorically that the resource is not being used. That's the best case scenario. That we can say, yep, we can see clearly it's not being used. We address that. But there are other resource types where it's a bit trickier, VMs are a good example where it's not so obvious, and we're going to have to use a set of heuristics to try and work out whether it's being used or not. Like right-sizing, however, we still have the scale problem. We're going to be able to find a way to push our insights out to our engineers. We still have that problem. The good news, however, is that the savings are literally 100%, and they're immediate. You decommission the resource, you stop paying for the resource. As FinOps practitioners, the way that we can support our teams is to track this waste over time, and even a count of resources that are in this sort of idle state. So which zoo animal does this remind me of? So in this case, I'm actually going to go for the meerkat. So the meerkat, everyone's happy. It's instant gratification. Okay. You get the win, you smile, and you can kind of move on and do the next thing, I guess. That's why I'm going for that one. So, Dusty, I'm sorry.
Is that Australian too? I don't know. I'm not familiar. So.
I think it's African.
Okay, all right, that'll work. Close. That's good. Southern Hemisphere. Yep.
That's right. You're all good. But anyway, so I've got a lot of very famous one-off stories of idle resources. Have you got any stories?
I think everybody does. I mean, if you look deep enough, usually that's one of the first things that surfaces is, especially lower tier environments, people always leave stuff.
Yeah.
It's easy, I used to go look for the biggest savings opportunity and then say, all right, let's get this stuff cleaned up. And then as you mature, as you mentioned, and we talked about this in the automation sidebar, the chalk talk yesterday, is like, really, how do you not only identify those things, but then how can you automate that stuff so that it takes care of itself?
My bad, I forgot to push the slide forward. So
you're good.
Yeah. So anyway, we do have the crawl, walk, run approach as well for idle and orphan resources. That crawl phase is about just identifying the resources in the first place. The walk phase, we now have some insights. We now have visibility of resources that are idle and doing nothing. Now let's push that out in a sustainable way out to our engineers. That's our walk. And then a run, again, is all about automating sort of the workflows.
Yep.
So with this slide now up, I might just say to you, Dusty, have you, that walk and run, are they sort of areas that you've managed to get to in your past? Or,
for certain. It's one of those things, the right-sizing information, it's not something that you would look at every day, all right? It's like you don't change oil in your car every time you fill it up with gas. Yeah. So, set up a frequency, as I would always recommend, check those things, see what's coming in idle. In my current environment, I do have a lot of things running idle.
Yeah.
So the first thing you do is you knock on the doors, you figure out, okay, is this needed? And it's fixed infrastructure that's getting ready to host new workloads as we ramp up customers. So always ask that business context and get that before you make any rash decisions and start, as Joe would do, finger point at people. And it's a different animal, animal.
That's right. Yeah. And what I'm hearing is like there's value kind of along the way. Even if you're in that walk stage, and that's in my experience, that's the funnest stage.
Oh yeah.
Because when you're just starting out,
it's the biggest opportunity.
Yeah, you'll find a database that has 0 connections for the last 12 months. It's costing $2,000 a month. And you're like, I just saved 24 grand.
Yeah, we were in the chalk talk yesterday, and someone gave a great metaphor, and he said the first time you broom your floor, you get a lot of dust.
Yes.
Right. So the first time you go in and look at your environment, you're going to get a lot of opportunity, but as you start to build that muscle, next time you broom the floor, there's less and less dust.
That's right.
So. That's
a bit more fun earlier on.
Yeah.
And later on, it's a bit more about automation and doing it in a sustainable way. Cool. So we're coming to our last area, which is scheduling dev and test environments. So the thing that does occur to me about scheduling dev and test environments is that the cost savings are pretty much guaranteed, and the risk is actually very, very low. So in my experience, the challenge has been getting our application engineers on board, and actually just having the effort and time to implement something. But we do definitely owe it to our companies to do this. Also for sustainability perspective, from carbon perspective, we also should do it from that perspective. So in terms of animals, in this case, is actually at the zoo. It's about crocodiles. So crocodiles, they're a cold-blooded animal. They're all about schedules. So during the day, they're out in the sun. They're very active. At night time, they're just basically asleep. It's a bit like our dev and test environment should be like this.
Yeah.
Again, we have a crawl. Surprisingly nuanced, sort of how you go about this. Before I hand it over to you, what I would say is, and I think your perspective is similar, is some people leave this as the last thing they do. as the last,
Sure.
Of the 5.
Sure.
But maybe it shouldn't be.
Because it could, again, like these are things that do take a labor invest, right, to execute on. And years ago when I was at Nationwide, everybody here probably knows, we get billed 8,760 hours in a calendar year from our cloud providers. Let's assume in the US calendar on average, there's 260 business days.
Yeah.
Okay, and let's assume for hypothetical purposes, we run our workloads 12 hours a day for those 260 business days. And if you do the math, you'll come up with 3,120 hours against 8,760 hours. That's a 64.3% reduction in your compute bill. For those of customers I've worked with, in my own past experience, your non-production compute, somewhere between 10, maybe even 20% of your bill, depending on where you're at from a maturity perspective. So when you stop and do the math, if this isn't on your radar or your FinOps roadmap, it's on mine for Q3 to deliver in Q4. Yeah. Like this is something that everybody needs to consider doing. And one thing I will caution, because a lot of organizations, what they do is the easy lever first. So they go out and they purchase rate optimization lever. They pull rate optimization levers. They get reservations or savings plans. When you do this, think about the scheduling impact that that's going to have on what your hourly commitment is and try to balance those two things out, right? So if you want to implement this, maybe try to implement it when you've got things expiring, if you're fortunate enough to do that. But either way, this is yeah, I can't.
Free money,
yeah, that's right, yeah. And I can talk more about how we implemented this at Nationwide. We were successful in doing this, and we actually, we saw the savings impact immediately. So there's a lot of good ways to make this happen.
Yeah, and I've seen, across the crawl, walk, run, I've seen it like really in extremes as well. So, a crawl is really simple of like, in a CI/CD tool, just having one team having a job to turn off their environment, for the weekend. Something as simple as that can save significant money, but eventually, progresses, the teams embrace it. You get to run where they're actually encoding the holidays, like Christmas, Boxing Day, whatever.
And we actually did that at Nationwide. So we hired Dave Lambert from finance. He came in and he's like, why are we running our development environment between, Christmas and New Year's? No one's working that week. It's a company holiday. So we went out and we did we got buy-in, and we had some exceptions, but we shut down our non-production environment, and that just became the culture now. So every year it's a thing, and the savings are real. So I'm putting that on my schedule for this year.
Awesome. And if you get really sophisticated, you put into your calendar when the cricket's on.
That's it.
You just turn everything off when
That's
the cricket's
right.
on.
Yeah.
All right. That's for you, Bala. All right. So that's our 5 areas that we've covered. I think they're all super valuable to approach specifically with dedicated strategies. I'm just going to take a step back for a very short moment and say that we can actually back this up with unit cost metrics and unit economics. So the reason why I bring this up is that a lot of the metrics that we were looking at before, the way we're thinking about, CPU and idle resources counts, it's all a bit, it's very detailed. It's very, number heavy. The business doesn't necessarily care about some of these numbers. So if you can represent these things as a unit cost metric, what is it costing us? What is the cloud costing us per thing? So for example, what is cloud costing us per ride share, per monthly active user? Whatever it is that matters for your business, if we can see this going up and down, preferably down, the unit cost dropping as a result of you taking these actions, that really is a great way to support this with the business. So we actually do have an example here from us working with Cloudability. So for us, processing billing data, you can imagine cloud billing data is super important. We have like trillions of rows coming in like all the time. And so we wanted to measure what was it costing us to process one billing line. That was our unit metric that we started with. And so I'm not sure how visible it is on that chart there, but to begin with, it was costing us about $22 to process 1 billion lines of billing data. So over time, we were able to optimize things, rightsizing. We also did commitments, which is a different type of optimization. And we took that down to like $5 per billion lines. And then over time, thankfully, our customer base increased. So our costs did actually edge up a little bit, but we were still able to use this unit cost metric to say, look, we're actually still improving our efficiency over time. So that's why I think unit costs, or even going all the way, if it's a part of your COGS, taking it all the way to unit economics, I think that's why it can be really important.
Yeah, I mean, we do this same thing at SailPoint. Every month I produce a report, and we're an identity management company, so it's how many identities that we've got provisioned that run on our hosting infrastructure, compare that to our monthly bill. Normalize the data, because obviously 29 days a month is a lot different than 30 or 31 days, so you have to normalize it, for your daily run rate. But measuring that unit economic and then monitoring that over time, and that goes right up to our leadership every month, and we do. I mean, it's a good efficiency metric to follow. So
awesome. Everyone understands it, right? So
yeah.
All right, so we're on 40 minutes, so we're coming to the end. Last slide or two. So ideas for action next week. I'll give my. I always go for I'll give you my one, and I'll let you have as many as you'd like, Dusty. But I always say, go and look for your idle resources. There's some really clear ways to find them. Go look for your databases that have 0 connections for the last week. If it's got 0 connections, it doesn't matter if the CPU is doing work. There's nothing coming in. There's nothing going out. You should be able to do something about that. But yeah, what's your...
I mean, I would love it if everybody could do like a comprehensive optimization analysis. So look at all the servers, understand where your money's being spent, and then figure out, and you can go to FinOps.org under, I think it's under usage optimization. We just have some new playbooks that were just launched, but figure out what you can do to optimize that service. And then what I've always done in the past is look at what percentage of this optimization do I feel that our organization is in a position to action. So we know we can't terminate 100% of our idle workloads, but I think based on my data, maybe I can do 60%.
Yeah.
Total that up, take 60%, and look at the labor effort it takes for each one of those FinOps activities to get executed on, and then just kind of plot that on a matrix. So you've got effort, relative to savings. And obviously you find the things that are least amount of effort with the greatest amount of savings, and then prioritize based on that. So it's a good exercise to do. I usually do that once a quarter just to make sure we're still on track, and then add those into your roadmap. Perfect.
So that's it for today. I think we've covered actually a lot of territory in like 40 minutes. So thank you, Dustin.
I'm ready to go to the zoo. I don't know how you guys are. I'm ready to go to the zoo.
We're going to go see the platypus.
Yeah, that's right, the platypus.
But I actually super appreciate you coming. Like, you had like almost no notice. So to come up here.
I appreciate everybody here that's sitting there, because I've been in your seat. I'm currently in your seat, so I love share stories. Meet me up. I'll be here all night. So I'm more than happy to share what little bit of knowledge I've got left. So it's not much. I won't be at the zoo.
You won't be at the zoo.
I won't be at the zoo.
And as you leave, feel free to come over to the Apptio Cloudability booth. I'll be there. My teammates will be there. We'd love to talk to you about this topic and how we can help you. So that's it. Who's
got questions? Good.
Thanks for watching. Check out more FinOps X 2024 content on our YouTube channel on the 2024 playlist. Support our channel by liking, subscribing, clicking the notification bell, and by leaving comments and questions for our speakers. We appreciate your support.